Okay, so the final whistle has just gone in the match between South Africa and Australia at the DHL Stadium in Cape Town. These are my initial reactions to the game. What a game it was once again. And plenty of things for us to talk about, to share online. So make sure you leave your comments. Let me know what your immediate reactions are with all the emotions and adrenaline going on. And then after things have settled down a little bit, I'll come back and make a fully deep analysis of this particular game. So you're going to get two videos from me about this one. So it was a big occasion in Cape Town today, wasn't it? Because the Wallabies haven't won there since 1992, so that record was on the line. Fraser McWright was the 91st captain of the Wallabies coming out on the field today. And in the last minutes, we saw Jean-Luc Dupree not starting for the Springboks and Quagga Smith starting off at number 8. So all those things were bringing us more ingredients into this exciting battle today. Well, we had a lot of rain by the look of it in Cape Town before this game got underway. The field looked muddy, it looked sticky, it looked hard for handling. And of course, the kicking game of the South Africans was going to be vital, particularly with Andre Pollard in the team. And for those that didn't know, Willie LaRue wasn't there today. He pulled up with an injury during the week. So we had a change on that one, and we saw Esterhuizen coming in to the bench for the Springboks today. Well, it didn't take long for South Africa to go to their game plan today. I made a note of it. It was 43 seconds into the game before Andre Pollard put up his first high ball and started testing the Australians out. And it came up with great results straight away for the Springboks, because within the first 5 minutes they were able to get 2 penalties in this game, all coming from situations where high balls were put up, contestables going in there, Australia getting themselves into trouble, and South Africa getting awarded a penalty for each of those infringements. So after 5 minutes, it was already 6-0 to the Springboks. We saw it last weekend in Ellis Park. They got off to a great start, and with Pollard in the team, the kicking for goal with the penalties was going to be on point, and that's exactly what happened. So Australia wasn't looking for that in terms of a start for that game, and it put them on the back foot straight away. But worse was to come for the Wallabies in that first 10 minutes of this game. And somehow you had to feel sorry for them, because they lost Tom Wright and they lost Nick White, two of their real key players in this Wallabies team. They were off the field before we even got to the 10th minute mark, and that was going to change the face of the game as far as I was concerned. Andrew Callaway came on for Tom Wright, and we saw Tate McDermott come on very early. Although he's been playing exceptionally well in the last games for the Wallabies, he came on a lot earlier than what the Wallabies were thinking in this game. Now, we all know, and we've been talking about the depth of this Wallaby team, so as a result of those two injuries, their bench was going to be really tested in this game to see whether they could stay with the South Africans for last week. Of course, South Africa got off to that fantastic start at Ellis Park in Johannesburg. They put on that 22 points very quickly and within 18 minutes of the game. So after they went up 6-0, I was looking for a response from Australia, and that's exactly what they did. And it was a brilliant response too, wasn't it? It was once again their backs getting involved, and Corey Toole, who was playing his first game in the green and gold jersey, came on and scored a brilliant try for the Wallabies. So that really got them back in the game on the scoreboard, and James O'Connor was able to get the conversion over. His kicking would become a very big issue in this game later on. But at that point of the game, we saw Australia hit the lead by 7 points to 6. So the couple of early penalties by Pollard were negated by the Australians on this occasion. Now, was this going to be a good thing for the Wallabies in this game? And what strategy was the Springboks going to continue to deploy? Well, we didn't have to wait long, because South Africa pounced back straight away, and it was that man, Andre Pollard, who did a great crossfield kick. There was a bit of a luck of the bounce, but it went definitely in Moody's favour, and Moody was able to collect the ball just a little bit too tall for Corey Toole, who'd scored the Wallabies try. And this time Moody went in and scored the try for the Springboks. But it was a very well executed try. The Springboks did the build up to that try very, very well. Pollard saw that Australia was short out wide when it came to defence, and it was a really good executed try by the Springboks. Pollard had to put the kick right on point, and he did that, and that's why he's in this team, of course. And it was judged to perfection. So a great try from the Springboks. They went back into the lead by 13 points to 7 just after 10 minutes. So was this going to be a super high scoring game? And then it was the Aussie turn to go, and boy, did I think they got close to scoring a fantastic try. They came down the right hand side, and it seemed to me that Pollard lost the ball, but the TMO interjected and said it was actually knocked out of his hand forward by Andrew Callaway. I don't think it was. That's just my opinion. I think it was a 50-50 call. I thought I saw the ball come out of Pollard's hand before Callaway made contact with Pollard, and as a result of that, Fraser McWright picked up the ball, went over and scored what looked like a fantastic try for the Wallabies, but it was disallowed because of that knock on. So fair enough, that was the bounce of the ball, that was the way it was called, and we had to move on. But that was a very big chance to the Wallabies. And were they going to rue it at the end of this game? Well, we had to carry on to see what was going on. But what was happening with the Springboks that I was really keen to watch was the kicking and the contestables, and they were doing an outstanding job. Pollard, Grant Williams, and also Fassi on a couple of occasions putting up high balls, contesting them against the Australians, having at least one or two. Colby was doing a fantastic job under the high ball, and they were winning these contestables, and that's where it really started to sway for me to the Springboks. The Aussies were really struggling under the high ball, and after losing Tom Wright at fullback, became very, very tight, and Australia were put under a lot of pressure as the Springboks continued to put up the high balls, and Australia were having all sorts of problems. It was just that when the Springboks did get the ball, the Australian defence was either too good, or there was a bit of a handling error, or there was a penalty against the Springboks. They were going down into the breakdowns a little bit overeager, the Springboks. On this occasion, they got pinged by the referee on a number of occasions for being in front of the ball, and they were clearing out the Australian players and coming back into the wrong side of the breakdown. And James Dolman, I thought, was refereeing this one very well and catching the Springboks and also the Australians when they were doing it. So that was an area of the game the referee was looking at both sides to see whether or not he can make sure that he kept them onside. It was pretty tight for the rest of the first half, but we got to the 27th minute mark, and Corey Toole again put a great kick in behind the South Africans, and they chased the ball. He nearly scored a great try. It was a brilliant work again by Toole. I was very impressed with him in this game. I thought he played exceptionally well for the Wallabies, and I thought he was playing exactly how I thought they would play. When I did my preview video, I talked about the Australians putting those kicks in behind South Africa to turn them around and put pressure on their defence, and that was working again in this game. So it was a strategy they were doing very, very well. On that occasion, Australia weren't able to back it up and get over for any more points. But what I liked about the South African defence on these occasions was that it was very strong. They were holding Australia out. So when Australia did get an opportunity to get into the red zone, Australia were having trouble. And on a number of occasions, they turned down penalty kicks for goal, and they went for the touch, which I thought was interesting at the time. Later in the game, it would cost them. But I thought this was an interesting play because it shows the mentality of this Australian team. They backed themselves, and after that win at Ellis Park, I think they came into this game in Cape Town believing that they could win those occasions where they put the penalty deep down into the Springboks territory. But I was seeing fantastic performances from Quagga Smith and Marco van Staden for the Boks. Those two in particular stood out for me in that first 25 minutes or so of the game. Van Staden was getting in there to the breakdowns. He stole a couple of balls really, really well. Grant Williams' kicking was good in terms of putting up those high contestables. And the important thing about Grant Williams' kicks, he gives his players time to get onside and to get up there and contest. So we saw Colby going up there. We saw a couple of the forwards getting up there. We saw Ruan Norki on one occasion get up and try and get one of those balls in a contestable situation. And then around the 33rd minute mark of the first half, I saw one of the most courageous things I've seen for a long time. I saw Taniela Tupou get a broken finger when he was down on the ground, and he got up and he carried on. He was holding his hand for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only about 90 seconds. But during that time when he had that broken finger, South Africa were on attack. He was the last man in the line of defence. A kick came through to him. He picked the ball up and got it over the touchline, and then the medics came on and put his broken finger back into its socket, which must have been absolutely painful at the time. So Taniela Tupou took one for the team on that occasion. He saved what I thought was going to be an absolute brilliant South African try. He was able to pick the ball up, kick it out over the touchline, and then worry about his broken finger that he'd been carrying for the last 90 seconds. So a little bit of heroics there from Tupou on that occasion. And it was a matter of time really. 35th minute of the game, we saw Quagga Smith go over for a really good South African try, but it came after multiple phases of pressure and build-up. They've been using that kick chase strategy, and then get the rolling mauls going. The Springboks forwards were eating up ground as they got towards the Australian line, and Quagga Smith ended up going over to score a really great try. So really pivotal time of the game again for the Springboks to score a try. It was 13-7. The try meant it was 18-7 with the kick to come. And of course, Andre Pollard got the kick over to make it 20 points to 7. So pretty similar to what we saw last weekend at Ellis Park. So I don't know whether you were thinking it at the time. Oh my goodness, could Australia come back this weekend? Well, they had Nick Wright off the field. They had Tom Wright off the field. They had a couple of walking wounded as well in the forwards. So it was going to be a very, very big task. But what I liked about the Springboks up until that stage of the first half was they were playing exactly the game they wanted to play. They were controlling the ball. The forwards were doing a good job. But the kicks were very accurate and they were winning most of the contestables. And this was putting Australia under a lot of pressure. So they were really doing what they did last weekend. They were managing the scoreboard. They had a really good lead as we had a minute or so to go before half time. They were controlling the ball in the air and they were trying to play some expansive rugby when they had the opportunity. So Pollard wasn't kicking everything. We saw them doing a couple of good breaks and we saw the outside backs, Deolandi and Jesse Krill, getting involved as well. And we saw Canan Moodie do a couple of runs on the wing in that first half. But then late in the first half, in fact in the last minute of the first half, Australia got another penalty opportunity. This one was kickable again, but on this occasion they decided to take the kick for goal and it was successful. So rather going into the changing rooms at 20 points to 7, they went in at 20-10, so a 10-point margin, a big difference. And I think that would have given the Australians a little bit of momentum going into half time, believing they were only down by 10 points this weekend compared to what they were down last weekend at half time. On the other side, I thought Russie would have been really happy with what he saw in that first half. Yes, there was a couple of handling errors from the Springboks, but that had to be expected. But the likes of Marco van Staden and Malcolm Marx were doing great things. I saw Oxenchair get in there and really participate in the breakdowns on a couple of occasions. I thought the scrums were pretty even in that first half. Both front rows were going down on different occasions and the referee did a good job in letting the ball play and not pulling up always for penalty. So I thought that was good on behalf of the referee in that particular instance. So we didn't see scrum domination from the Springboks again in this game. The Australians, on the other hand, I think they really missed Tom Wright at fullback. Andrew Callaway came on and did a couple of things that weren't too good. And I just thought they missed Wright's creativity from the back on a couple of occasions where they could have run the ball back at the Springboks, because we see when Australia does this, they're very, very dangerous and they make some good territory. And now with Tate McDermott coming on earlier in this game, he had to change his game management. When you come on with 20 minutes to go, you can basically just fully let the tank go, but on this occasion he had to make sure he got through to the end of the game. So we saw one or two little runs from him in that first half, but most of the time he was trying to get his backs out onto a good position or put up the high ball in return to what the Springboks were doing. But Australia wasn't as effective in terms of getting that high ball. So we came back from half time and another critical injury for Australia. Joseph Sua Ali went off the field and Tane Edmed came on. So they were losing another one of their key pings, and we've talked about it in the comments that the Australians just don't seem to have the all-round depth of class that some of the other teams have at the moment. And we were going to see whether or not Tane Edmed, who had one previous start with the Wallabies, was able to live up to the pressure that was going to come in the second half. I think the South Africans would have been pleased with what they did in the first half, but they wanted to probably push on now and show that they can continue the dominance. And after 5 minutes of the second half, we saw Schneemann go off and we also saw Norkia go off. So that meant Etzebeth and De Jager were on early in this game with 35 minutes still to play. So I thought that was a good strategic move from Rassie Erasmus. So as is normally the case, it was going to be important to who would score first in the second half. We were 6 minutes into the second half and it was Australia that was going to grab one back from the Springboks. And it was Canan Moodie who made a mistake under the high ball. Max Jorgensen, there he goes again, doing what Max Jorgensen does. And he set off and he scored a fantastic try yet again for the Australian Wallabies. This kid's only 20 years old. He's going to be a good rugby player when he grows up, isn't he? But he went over and importantly got Australia right back into this game straight after half time. So James O'Connor was able to get the conversion over and all of a sudden we had a 3-point game with the South Africans ahead by 20 points to 17. I was starting to get on the edge of my seat. I thought this was going to get really interesting. Could Australia do this with so many of their stars off the field? It was going to really call on the others to do a good job. But I had a lot of confidence in the Springboks being able to stick to their script in this game. There was a different feel about them, and it was all because of Handré Pollard, in my opinion. I thought he was managing the game very well. He wasn't always kicking. He was looking for opportunities to offload the ball and to get his backs involved in the game. And this is exactly the kind of rugby that I think Russie and Tony Brown are looking for from the Springboks. They want to be able to have the option to play both styles of game within a game. They want to go to that kick option and put the pressure on when they need to. But when the play allows it, they want to be able to go wide and involve the likes of Moody and Colby and Fussy from the back into their backline, and that's exactly what they started doing. I thought this was really positive signs from the Springboks, because Angus Bell came on in the 48th minute for the Wallabies, and he's played outstandingly since the British and Irish Lions series as a replacement coming on the field. So I was looking for him to start doing what he did, and he did exactly that straight away. He was getting great percentages of play over the gain line. He was getting those little passes out to his support players, and he was starting to tire some of those South African forwards around in terms of their defensive line. If you do this repetitively over a number of minutes, it starts to tie down the defence, and you start to see some holes in the defensive line, and that was the play the Australians were going for. But unlike last weekend at Ellis Park, South Africa kept to their game plan, and they kept getting opportunities to go forward. And again, it was basically because Handré Pollard and Grant Williams were controlling the game really well from 9 and 10. They were able to keep themselves in the Australian territory and therefore keep pressure on. And because now Etzebeth and De Jager were on the field, we started to see more control and tightness from their experience, both around the field, in the lineouts, and also in the set pieces. The scrums were pretty even in this game, and I didn't see any real dominance going either way as the game went on. So with 25 minutes to go, I thought it was going to become a bit of a chess match, and that it did. We'd had Sasha Feinberg and Gomazulu come on at that stage. He replaced Kainan Moody, who wasn't having the best game. He made a couple of errors that I saw. Let me know if you saw Kainan Moody do a couple of things unscripted out there today. And then we saw Handré Pollard get another opportunity in the 56th minute to put some more points on the board for the Springboks. And of course, the Iceman delivered with that kick, and he put the score out to 23 points to 17. So now the pressure went back on the Wallabies. They had to score a try to really get themselves back into this game. And were they going to be able to do it? Well, the newfound confidence in this Wallaby team, and with what Joe Schmidt is doing with this team in terms of making them believe that they can win any game, they certainly got back into it. And it all started around the 66th minute, where Australia put together 10 phases of play. And as I said earlier in the video, it started to open up opportunities in the defensive line. And I think this was a really good ploy by Australia, just going one or two off, getting committed players from the South Africans into the breakdown, and whether or not they got a penalty from the indiscretions the South Africans were making in the breakdown, or whether they were able to clear the ball and get it out for an opportunity, and that's exactly what they did. But the Australians didn't go wide on this occasion. They kept the pick and goes going from a couple of good line-out mauls, and Amosa, who had just come on the field for the Australians as a replacement, ended up going over and scoring a tremendous try and getting them right back into the game. So it was a really well created try from Australia with Amosa going over. It was definitely within kicking range, a relatively easy kick for James O'Connor, although the conditions were very difficult. But he ended up missing the conversion. His left foot, as he went to kick the ball, slipped, and he pushed the ball wide. It was a really, really big point in the game, this. So we still had 13 minutes to go. That would have put Australia in the lead by 1 point, but the South Africans held on and were leading by 23 points to 22. So now you felt, as a result of that kick, that Australia needed to chase the game a little bit. And was this going to be their downfall? Would this create opportunities for the Springboks? Well, 2 minutes later, and the South Africans were doing some good multi-phase play. The ball came out to their back line again, and it was a very similar play to what we saw last weekend when the ball went out wide on the left-hand side of the South African field. The ball went out to Fassi like it did last week, and instead of having the interception this time from Tom Wright, who scored a try, the ball went out over the touchline. So it came down to the last 10 minutes of the game, and who would have wished for anything more after that thrilling end we saw in the game at Ellis Park? We were going to see another thrilling finish to this game in Cape Town. But on this occasion, it was South Africa that was going to get the opportunity. And it came about because the ball came back to the Australians on their defensive line. James O'Connor got the ball here to make a split split-second decision whether he was going to kick the ball or pass it. He decided to pass it. Andrew Callaway was the only man standing behind him who wasn't too far out from the Australian line, and Andrew Callaway unfortunately knocked the ball on for the Australians, and it gave the South Africans an opportunity with a scrum about 20 metres out from the Australian line, deep on attack in the centre of the field. A very difficult position for the Wallabies to defend, and one felt at this point of the game this was going to be it. Were the Springboks going to be able to get in and score and grab this game from the Wallabies after that unfortunate handling error from Andrew Callaway? Now, it's all very well talking about are they going to take the opportunity. You've got to be good enough to do it, and this South African team is good enough to do it. So they put down the scrum, they put a lot of pressure on the Wallabies. The Wallabies did hold though, but the ball came out to the South Africans and they were able to do some quick pick and goes towards the line. They got closer and closer with every try. Every time a South African picked up the ball, I thought they were going to go over and score, and it was finally that man, Eben Etzebeth, who got the ball and went over 1 metre from the line, dived over and put the ball right on the line and scored the try for the Springboks. And so 75 minutes gone, the kick to come, and of course Andre Pollard wasn't going to miss that, and it was a great score from Etzebeth for the South Africans. It was a great display of control, again close to the line. And as I've said throughout my videos, if you're down in the opposition's red zone, you've got to come away with points, and this is what this South African team is very good at doing. And they did it this week versus not being able to do it on a couple of occasions last weekend. So that was one of the changes I saw in this week's game for the South Africans versus last week's game. So the conversion was over. The score was now 30 points to 22. Just a few minutes left on the scoreboard. The Australians were going to throw everything at it. Now, just with 3 minutes left in the game, the Australians were really chasing the game, of course. They had a couple of penalty kick opportunities because they wanted to take a penalty kick, try and get the restart from the Springboks, and then try and get one of those wonderful miracle tries to win the game. But that wasn't going to be the case. They missed a couple of those penalties, and then in the last minute of the game, South Africa got down on attack again, and it looked like the Springboks were going to put more points on at the end of this game, when Australia were really chasing the game and desperate to try and get some points on the board. So we're about 82 minutes on the clock when this game came to an end, and it came to an end where the South Africans had the ball again. It ended up going over the touchline, and James Dolan decided to blow the whistle for full time in what was another thrilling encounter between these two teams, and a well-deserved victory to the South African Springboks. They were able to do this week what they didn't do last week. They had a good lead at half-time. They were able to hold on to it in the second half and manage the game a lot better despite the Australians coming back at them. Australia won the second half 12 points to 7, so once again they're showing the ability to come back in games, and this is going to be very dangerous for every team the Australians play. They're going to be able to come back at you in the second half. If they're able to work out how to play that first half and stop the opposition from scoring so many points, they're going to be extremely dangerous. But I think having Nick White and Tom Wright off early in this game did have an impact on the Wallabies. It's not an excuse, it's an observation of two of their really good players being off the field, and then they didn't have someone like Joseph Suaalii plus those other two guys in the second half to really go full throttle at the Springboks. But the Springboks were really good in this game. They did what they didn't do last weekend. They managed the game throughout, and they were able to use their power when they had that opportunity late in the game to go over and score that try. I thought Etzebeth was great again coming off the bench this week versus starting the game last week and having a really good game as far as I was concerned. And I thought Grant Williams did well as well until Cobus Reinhardt came on to finish the game for the Springboks. Marco van Staden was a standout for me. Malcolm Marx got substituted in the last couple of minutes of the game. I thought he had an outstanding game, as did Oxen Chair. Mr. Toit did a good job as well, but I don't think the Springboks pack was as dominant as some people thought it was going to be. I thought the Australians held their own. I think the Australians missed Harry Wilson in this game also, not because I thought Fraser McWright was a bad leader. I just think Wilson brings another dimension at number 8, and I think Rob Valentini had a good return to rugby. He needed this run, so I think next time out he's going to be even better for it as well. I think Australia needs Nick Skelton and Rob Valentini in their start-on team every week they play. So his final score, 30 points to 22 to the Springboks. They managed the game very well. The high contestable balls were the differential for me. They played extremely well. Their defence was good at times as well. The Springboks, they had turnover ball, one thanks to Marco van Staden and Oxen Chair on a couple of occasions. And when they had the opportunity to go and put the nail in the coffin at the end, they did it. And that takes a class team to be able to do that, and they were able to do it. There was too much for Australia to have to do in this game compared to last week. They didn't get those opportunities in terms of spontaneity this week. They had to create things, and as a result of that, they weren't quite there as we saw last weekend. But you know what? This is the resurgence of the Australian Wallabies. I can now say with some authority in my voice that Australia can beat any rugby team in the world on their day, and they're going to be critical opponents to everybody they play this year. So watch out, All Blacks, for that Bledisloe Cup game at Eden Park. It's going to be an absolute cliffhanger, and I hope the Australians can get these injured players back on the field, because they're going to make a huge difference. And the gap between South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, France, Ireland, it's about that big right now, and that's what's making international rugby at this level so exciting. I don't think the Springboks team is absolutely dominant. I don't see the bomb squad being absolutely dominant. I see, with the right strategy, teams like Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, France, England, and probably Argentina can do things that will upset the Springboks team. So this makes rugby test matches super exciting, because we don't know who's going to win every time they go out onto the field. And we've seen all these different combinations used by Russie now, and we saw a much better game today from the South Africans. Their game was on point. They deserved the win. They played well. They did all the right things. But it's great to see rugby in this level of competition, isn't it? So there we go, a deserved win to the South African Springboks, 1-1 against the Australian Wallabies. They were able to beat the Wallabies by 8 points today. The Wallabies beat them by 16 points last weekend. Now both teams can have a rest before they go on to their next chapter, which is going to be monumentous when the Springboks take on the All Blacks at Eden Park. And the Wallabies are going to welcome Argentina to Townsville on the Queensland coast in Australia. And I'm sure Joe Schmidt's going to want all those injured players back on the field so he can really show at home in front of his home crowd what this Wallabies team can do on a hard, dry track in Townsville, which I'm sure it's going to be. Congratulations to both teams. Congratulations to both sets of fans. You both had a weekend to celebrate now, a win for each of your teams. South Africa, you did it. You came back after losing last week, so kudos to you. You've kept your Cape Town winning streak against the Wallabies intact, and well done to Australia. You showed once again grit, courage and determination to take the Springboks on in their own backyard, and that's something the New Zealand All Blacks weren't able to successfully do last year in the Rugby Championship. So well done to Joe Schmidt and his entire team. Now let me know in the comments what you thought of this game. Who were the standout players for you? I saw a lot of them across both teams. I thought Grant Williams, Andre Pollard did very well for the Springboks. Fassi again, question mark for me at fullback, and his performance again today. Kanan Moody didn't have the best game in the world, and unfortunately I think the conditions affected him. Cheslin Colby was brilliant again. He was hungry for work, good under the high ball and doing a lot of good things, and we saw the impact of Damien Delaney and Jesse Krill when they did get the chance to go in and do some good defensive gains on the front foot. The side of things, I think their front row did well, considering I was a little bit apprehensive about Robertson coming in for James Slipper. I thought he did okay. I thought the Locks did another good game for the Wallabies. They held their own against this great Springbok pack, and the back three were good as well. Tom Hooper got better as the game went on. We didn't quite see Fraser McWright in the vein that we did last weekend from him, but he did have a good game. And at number 8, Rob Valentini, as I said, I thought he built into the game as the game went on, and I think he'll be good for this run today. So there we go. Those are my thoughts straight after the final whistle. Let me know in the comments what you think. Great win by the Springboks. Congratulations, 30 points to 22. Now I'll go and get ready for the next game up this afternoon, Argentina and New Zealand from Argentina. Kickoff is in a couple of hours' time, so time to have a couple of tacos and a cold drink before we get into that one as well. I'll see you all again soon after that game with my thoughts about it. Until then, keep enjoying your rugby, everyone. Adios from Cancun. Bye for now.